谢谢. Yeah, thank you for your speech. I must say that María del Rosario Escobar, the Counselor for Culture of Medellín in Colombia, cannot be with us. And Miao Cheng Chao cannot be with us tonight. I apologize for the alteration of the program, but I am also very happy because instead of 15 minutes for questions and answers, we will have the triple of time, 45 minutes. And I would like to invite you to raise your hands, and we will collect questions to Yvonne and Jan during approximately the next meeting. After this first round, I will invite Carlos Villaseñor to take the floor to briefly explain Medellín. Mr. Villaseñor is from Mexico, and he was one of the persons elaborating the plan for cultural development of Medellín. We will invite him to take the floor and explain this process. But previously, as we have very recently listened to the presentation of Yvonne and Jan, and the audience is very knowledgeable on local cultural policies and local governance, I invite you to raise your hand. Please do, because otherwise, as you know, as I know many of you, I will invite with your given name and your family name to take the floor. So I see one over there. Ninja was first. So yes, Ninja, and then the gentleman to the left. And is there any other? Yes, a gentleman to the right, and another gentleman to the right also. You also? Yes, Bill. Nancy would like to say something. And Ahmad? Very good. Ninja, do you have a microphone? There is. Yes. Is there any other microphone? Because we perhaps need this one. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Minja Yang. I'm currently serving as president and professor at the Raymond Lunaire International Center for Conservation after 30 years in the UN, including UNESCO, the World Heritage Center. Now, I'd like to address the question to both our Chinese colleague and to our Spanish colleague with regard to decentralization and culture, because this issue of local governance, of course, is framed within the national policy of culture. And further to that question on the system of decentralization, the role of the local authorities as in relation to the national authorities. Also the question on in what way, for example, in Bilbao, has your culture-led development strategy involved the participation of the local authorities? And for our Chinese colleague, it's very interesting that it was very much instigated by national policy. However, in what way has efforts been made to rope in like civil society?
Can the microphone go to the gentleman to the left? Yes.
各位好，我是上海师范大学都市文化研究中心的教授，我叫杨天龙。我对第一位发言的特别感兴趣，这个第尔巴鄂的副市长啊，我觉得把这个城市建成这样有文化、有魅力，特别有意思。我想问一个什么问题呢？就在这样一个城市的建设过程中间，专家、市民发挥了怎样作用？因为在很多城市建设中间，市长常常是决定性的。 也有很多市长他没文化，所以常常呢就把有文化的城市改造成没文化，这是一个问题啊。所以我在想，就是我们128这样的城市怎么改造过程中间，怎么听取专家和市民的意见，保持这样的城市的文化。现在有很多城市的发展就是市长说了算，官员说了算，然后这个对城市的影响特别大。一幢大楼起来了，其实是文化是没了。我就想提这个问题，谢谢。
谢谢。There was the third hand that was raised. I think it was to the left. Yes. If it is okay with you, Ivone and Jan, perhaps after this third question you will try to answer, and then we will go to the second round with more questions. Please.
Yeah, my question is just simple. We spoke in the discussion before about the links between culture and education, and I just would like to know in both experience the role of education that has been set in helping actually the cultural policy.
Thank you. Ivone, can you answer to these questions?
Yes, I will try to summarize. The first question was about decentralization. Okay, in each country, each level of government has its own competences. But sometimes from a local government, we can do a lot of things to strengthen the importance of any idea you want. In this case, in our city, it was culture. It was the local authorities which made the first impulse, because the city was ruined, was in a drama. And I've talked about the leadership, and the mayor was able to speak and to convince and to have the agreements of the different levels of government, even considering that the political parties in the different levels of government were not the same. Because the objective was that something had to be done, not to win a political career, that the city was wrecked, was done, and that we had to reinvent it and to go to the future. Talking about decentralization from a local government, let me tell you that in almost all of local policies, we have district and local committees composed by politicians, but also by citizens that decide which things must be done, but knowing how much at cost, because that's education also. Citizens must know how many is, for example, I don't know, a new promenade or a new road. So some of the money of the local government goes directly to the district. The neighbors and the associations speak about it, they know the cost, and then they choose, like if they were a government, they are not, what they want. And if there's a problem, a technical problem, the civil servants go and explain. And that's also decentralization inside a local government. But that is done not only with the works on the streets, also with the culture. The amount of money goes to each district. Sometimes we prepare something for a district or for a neighborhood and people didn't like it. So if you give them the space to talk about it, they say, okay, that spectacle of theater today is no worth, because on those days we have a festival in our community made by us. So why don't you invest that money a month later and in a magic festival, because this week is full of kids. So we put money, the civil servant, the technicians organize, but we try to listen to the voice of the people, because I want to say, the macro policies are good, but local governments are in touch with real people who have real needs. The second
question was about the building of the city alone or without an export. The city has considered on the mayor self and his team that it's good to have an export team to develop the future of the city. And in that export team, there are important people of all kinds of sectors, universities, NGOs, architects, industries of different types, owners of shops. And we try to represent all the sectors of the society, and that board thinks about macro policies, the vectors of the future of the city. Then the local government, which is directly elected, is the one who must manage that idea. But this management, if you thought about maybe the mayor is not right. If the mayor is not right, in 4 years people won't vote him, so he won't be a mayor. But when we present our program, we try to establish which are our commitments, and each year we try to measure and to give all the people how are we doing with that commitment that we signed, we agreed with the citizenship of the city. And that's good because people know not only what we want to do, but also if we are doing it. In fact, when the city and the vast institutions made that bet how to give it themselves, a lot of people, the citizens, normal citizens, were against it. And people couldn't understand why, in a moment of crisis, the administration, the public administration of the national government, regional government, and local government were throwing money to some museum no one knew what was going to be, when there were a lot of traditional iron industries and steel industries dying, and there was a high ratio of unemployment. But when they saw that different levels of government and different political parties were convinced that that was the way, people let they gave a chance. And as I told you before, in 1 year, it recovered the initial investment and went more. So with transparency and explaining things, you go ahead. And the last question was about the relationship about culture and education. So it's not only the same thing, but for me it is. I mean, the city considers for culture and education, and it's not it's thought. I mean, it's thought. Knowledge and education. Education not only about going to school, and you must know how to read, it's compulsory, it's obligatory, every child must go to school, but it's about new values. It's about science, it's about thinking, it's about not to go through ideas, but to get the roots. It's about knowing the other you have in front of you. And so many of the programs, cultural programs that are developed by the municipality, not only by the cultural department, use the power of culture to help make a better city, a human-scale city. And that is a holistic approach, and education is part of it.
The first question about the role of local government. I think there's some difference in China. You know, local government in culture industry is something a little bit different from international cities. In China, especially in cities or towns, the publicity department of CPC, local committee, will be in charge of cultural industries. They will plan different documents to guide the cultural industries to the development. Let me give you an example. For the Pingquan in Hebei province, the government, the publicity department of CPC, Pingquan Committee, they have several functions to develop cultural industries. First one is to make plans they will make a plan for 5 years or 10 years to guide the local cultural development. And we ask some institutes or universities to give a research report to tell them how to develop the cultural industries and what other things can do to promote culture. And this is the first function. The second one is they will make or establish some cultural clusters to introduce some cultural companies into a certain area to develop. The third one is to choose best industries to develop. You know, every year the government have some special fund to develop cultural industries. So they will choose some product industries to give the finance support. For example, they will choose animation industry or digital TV, radio, or performing arts. They will do these kind of things. The fourth one is that they will promote to develop companies. I mean, they will give some special fund to help the cultural companies to live in the fierce competitions in the market. They will give different awards or different kind of means to give money to these companies to help this develop more stronger. And the second question about the culture education. I am from university. My institute is called Cultural Development Institute. This institute was established in 2006 and it's engaging in cultural education to cultivate cultural professionals since its establishment. So far, we have this kind of courses to educate people in culture area. The first one we offer some cultural courses, for example, animation, urban cultural design, performing arts, and expert. You know, my university is works on media studies. They have a lot of these studies related to cultural industries. So in the cultural education, we have more than 15,000 professors in different backgrounds of culture, so they can give mixed courses to students. The second one is training. We every year will start some training courses for the engagers in cultural industries. They will raise some questions they met in the industries. So they will ask the university, the institute to give their some research report or commercial policies to help them to solve this kind of problems. And the third one is about research programs and international research programs. We're always connected with some international scholars in one unit or in one research programs. The students can learn different concepts or different ideas through the international corporations. So I think these are two main methods for us to the cultural educations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There are 4 more questions. The first one was to the right side of the room. Am I? Yes. And then you, then Nancy, and then Professor Gala, and you also. Okay. We're going to collect all these questions all together.
I'm sorry, my question perhaps adjusts to the president and also relating to the interpretation of local heritage. And just now, Professor, I think the conference, the UNESCO promoting a basic value which equity and dignity. These two basic values which very much assumed as a universal. But Professor Feng raised a question that maybe in China there will be different interpretation, especially the concept of equity. The respect and dignity is based upon difference. It's not based upon equity. So Confucian value, there is no concept of equity. And this is extremely important. What the Confucian achieve is that benevolence and love must flow into the relationship. He is not care about the equity. So I raise this question because internationally, equity has assumed as the universal value. So which is very different from China. For Confucian, there's two concepts I
considered as universal in his work. One is qing qing, that means love. Another is dignity, 尊尊, respect. He think these two are universal or mutually related. Mutually related. Dignity and difference are mutually related. Without difference, there will be no dignity. No people pay respect to you if you are put in equal positions. The problem is that we need a kind of love and benevolence flow into the difference, the relationship of difference. So I think this is a basic values we have to negotiate in the international forum to think about the meaning, cultural meaning in the East. Maybe today, tomorrow, you will visit Liangzhu Museum. The jade will show you, which is origin of civilization, which very much assumed in the Western historical perspective. The jade have to be interpreted based upon Confucian value, benevolence, and the difference and the dignity. So to me, the local heritage, even in Hangzhou, if it were to be properly interpreted, properly reveal its meaning, we have to negotiate, renegotiate those basic values assumed in the international discourse of heritage. This is my question I would like to address to a response to Professor Bong and also to the interpretation of local heritage in China. I mean in China.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will give the floor to Professor Feng Tianyu.
I'm sorry, I just introduced myself. I'm a professor of the Zhejiang University in Hangzhou, located in cross-cultural study and heritage study.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You have raised a very, very important question. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Next question is you.
Thank you. I'm afraid my question is not a very short one either. I'm Michael Eddy from the U.S. Agency for International Development, and some of the questions I had were addressed by the panel, but I'd like to put them out for the panel and this very distinguished audience in general. And it's around the question that was raised a little earlier about methodologies or experiences in involving local communities in one, identifying a culture, identifying cultural priorities in programs, including in partnership with UNESCO, particularly in areas where particularly intangible culture, language, traditions, stories are at risk of disappearing. What are methods that can be used to reach out to communities to identify where that culture is, what the priorities are, and what can be done at the local government level to support those priorities. I know UNESCO has been very leading on a practice called cultural mapping, where communities actually identify where their priority sites are, where what their stories and traditions that are most important to be preserved. And I'm curious to probe. I know the Basque example that the Deputy Mayor talked about was one. So anyway, that's the broad general interest.
Very good question. Thank you. Microphone has to go to Nancy, who is an expert in cultural mapping. So if you also want to answer this question, please do.
We'll talk. My name is Nancy Duxbury. I'm a researcher at the Center for Social Studies at the University of Coimbra in Portugal. I'm also an adjunct professor at the School of Communication in Vancouver at Simon Fraser University. My research relates to the inclusion of culture in in sustainable city building, and how culture is integrated to plans and policies at the local level. So I don't think it's been addressed to these questions yet. So my question is, another preamble. What I find is quite fascinating is how clear that cities have chosen culture to be a driver for their development in lots of areas. But when you look, and they're all also trying to be sustainable cities, but when you look at the sustainable city plans and policies and guidelines that are developed for cities and incentives, culture is hard to find sometimes. And I'm wondering both of you and anyone else who wishes to answer, whether your cities have a policy or plan to become a sustainable city, whether those policies or plans incorporate any cultural elements, and so which ones and how, and art and cultural elements, what you think would be the door opener to enable that to happen through cultural and
Thank you very much, Nancy. Professor Gala also raised his hand.
Thanks, Jordi. I'm Executive Director of the International Institute for Inclusive Museum from Copenhagen, but originally from India, Australia, blah, blah, blah. But I was, thank you for both your presentations, but even in a particular focus, I was privileged. Last year, the Secretary General of UN in Rio World Summit said, more of the same will not do. You know, it's a key line. And I think that I was privileged to be, at the opening of the Bilbao and the forum that went with it, Frank Gehry, Giorgio Armani, and the others. It's inspirational, it's bold. People were nervous whether it would work or not. And then they took us on a whole tour of the port, which was still in decline at that stage. And the city center, there's two issues. What I wanted to ask is that I know you've come a long way. It's a bold experiment that's worked. It's worked so well economically that everybody wants an off-the-shelf Bilbao. In Australia, Adelaide, Geelong, you name every city in Australia has made a bid for an off-the-shelf Guggenheim. But what was, in all of this, I know that a substantial part of the money came from your own governments at different levels. But to what extent is there investment from outside in terms of foreign direct investment in all the infrastructure? I'm not just talking about, Bilbao. The second thing is in terms of your GDP, at present, now that you're the Vice Mayor, in terms of your GDP, what percentage is from tourism, what percentage is from the industrial, iron and steel sector? And the last point in relation to that, what impact has the current financial crisis had on the success story and how you actually coping with it?
Thank you, Professor. You have the floor for the last question, and then I will ask Carlos Villaseñor to take the floor. Yes. Here, there's the first row. A gentleman will raise his hand.
Hi, my name is Richard Xu from Shanghai, Tongji University. The few projects we work specifically right now is really city regeneration and also new city planning. I'm very interested. I think my question is going to follow up a little bit from the last gentleman's question. Is at what time and what study can a city be certain that €100 million investment for a museum will change the city? At this time, at 2013, 2014, there may be a two-road path: culture, art, and the second possibility of the fork of the road could be knowledge economy, innovation. Some people say knowledge economy, innovation, entrepreneurship is actually helping the economy to revive easier than culture. I think we also probably selfishly ask the question from China's point of view, with 150 cities being built at the same time, 1/3 of them all wants museum. How do we think of content, programmatic, and enough content to go around? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question. Before Yvonne and Jan answer to these very good questions, all of them, from very specific questions on budgets and on methodologies to broad questions on on our capacity to have the same images and the same understanding of the concepts we are using. So we have a very, very complete range of questions. Please, Carlos Villaseñor, take the floor. The microphone should go. And Carlos, in 3-4 minutes, please. I know that this is an almost impossible task, but tell us something about Medellin and its change.
Okay, thank you, Jordi. Yes, I agree with you that Medellin is a very special case in Latin America, at least. To have an idea of its importance, we shall remark that a statistic for security that is always used is the number of violent deaths per 100,000 inhabitants. And usually the cities have between 50 and 30 violent deaths for each 100,000 inhabitants. Medellin reached 384 violent deaths for 100,000 inhabitants. So that's important because that's the reason was what made Medellin to search for the cultural option. We are talking about governance, and I think that governance is the main responsibility of the local governments. And I see in 3 levels. First of all, the governments have to fulfill the right of the persons to have access, participation, and joy of culture. That's very clear. The second, and this is the first thing in which Medellin is very important, is to give the people a chance to be introduced in this new paradigm of the world. To be cities that give the persons the abilities, the capabilities to develop themselves and to live together, to be creative, to have innovation, to have competitiveness. And in this sense, for example, Medellin designed what's called the library park, which in a single place they give the opportunity to the poorest people of the city to access to computers, to internet, to the books, but also to all the things that gave them the opportunity of development. Usually these library parks are located in the most conflicted places of the city, where the police station was located, where the army had their home, where many bombs were detonated, and in those places they located these new ideas of representation, of self-representation for the people from Medellin. This program was absolutely successful. They have 10 library parks in Medellin, which are very well designed because they connect these conflicted parts of the city and give some kind of equal dignity to all these places. And the third thing in which Medellin is also very successful is to use culture as a source of governance. For example, they have many programs in which they gather in the same concert the young people that play metal and that are emos and that different kinds of music, and they promote for them to work together. Or the fans of the football teams that usually they fight at the football tournaments, and they gather them in a radio program so they may talk instead of being violent. There are the two things. So Medellin is a very important example, not the only one, but I think the main example in America. And I invite you to know much more of Medellin because it would be very interesting in terms of governance and culture.
Thank you very much, Carlos, for being courageous to accept our challenge to explain in a very reduced number of minutes passionate history, the passionate recent history of the cultural policies of Medellin. This is the final round. I would like to ask Professor Feng Tian Yu to come to the floor for the last round, to answer to the question or to comment any other questions. And if it is okay with you, Ivone and Jan, we will give the floor in the first moment to the professor.
刚才刘教授提的这个问题就是非常重要，涉及到关于中国智慧、中国文化，当然它是谈到了儒家是否具有普世价值当中的一些重要的这个思想平等。我想是这样，就是中国智慧，当然这是谈到了儒家体系。 应该说，它都包含平等，包含，比如在儒家当中，这是儒家的一贯的观念，就是人皆可为良医，就是每一个人都可以成圣，圣人并不是专属于这个极个别的，人人都可以往这个方向走。后来你看到宋明理学当中。 产生了一个重要的观点，满街都是圣人，大家都可以成圣。这是他就是在人格上，他的一个终极的一个观点，就是还是认为本身还是可以成为平等。另外从法治的角度也有这个，比如这个王子犯法与庶民同罪等等在一起，在中国的法治观念上也有，这是我说啊，就是这样的一些理念。但是由于中国文化当中存在的一些问题，上面我们是讲到一些正面价值，但是任何一个文化它都有它有问题的一个方面，由于它存在着一系列的问题，所以这个。 包括平等的实现，是这种，这也就是在近代以来中国文化需要从包括西学在内的很多外来的文化中求得一些借鉴，然后进行新的综合，在新的社会实践当中。 来创造更完备的这样的一个新的文化，不是说我们原来的文化是时间是存在一个缺陷，这个我们还要做新的方法去解决这些问题。但是人类的一些普世价值，在中国文化当中都可以找到一些相应的对应的，而且有我们自己的。 特色这一点都可以讨论，而且都可以找到很清楚的例证来说明这个
谢谢 Professor. Thank you very much. Ivone, you have the floor to answer the questions, and you have around 3-4 minutes to answer them all. So, courage.
I will try it. I think the first one was about specific methodology involving local communities or local governments to protect those specific cultural manifestations. I think it's not. I cannot talk about a concrete recipe. I think that local policies must adapt to the context, and the context can be different. So each local government must adapt its policies and the way that government manages the problems or the needs the citizens have to the context in which that government is managing it. But I think that it's important to have that culture of governance, of transparency, and considering the citizens or the people who live in the city, which are part of it. I think that the local government must be committed with that governance. And in the concrete case of the Basque language, I must say that it also needed a lot of money. Because we don't talk about money, we haven't talked about money today, but there is a crisis and culture needs money. I'm not saying it's a cost, it's an investment, but we need money. So in the concrete aspect of the Basque languages, there was a big investment of money, especially through public television in Basque language, and also they use Basque in public schools. But the languages are a treasure because it's a conception of a world. So if we want to preserve the treasures, we must invest money in preserving them. The second one was about the GDP and which part of the GDP was from services and industry. 20 years ago, industry was almost 50% of the GDP of the metropolitan area, and services were 36%. But nowadays, the ratio has changed, and the difference between both of them has been widened. So now services are 62% of the GDP, and 27% are industrial, comes from industry. And the last one, I think, that was about the two-road path and the knowledge economy. It's my personal opinion, but I think that the city can have a diversified strategy. You were asking about, shall I build a new museum? It depends what for you want that new museum. It depends. You must think about it. Our museum was an icon, but our strategy is not based on that icon. We were a small city. Shanghai is a big city, so we needed something to put us in the international map and to show us who we were and where we wanted to go. Maybe you don't need it, I don't know. But I think that the strategy can be complementary. If you need a museum, you must think, what for do you need it? Is it a new one? Will it be the biggest one? But maybe next year someone builds a bigger one. It depends what for you need. Culture is not only economic growth. Development is much more than economic growth. It's important. We need money, but there are other things that are important also. And in fact, if you center only in that icon and you lose culture in a wide point of view, you can lose the sense of the pertinence of the community who's living in the city if you invest all culture in icons. Sometimes you need them, but you must do much more things. The most important one is to make people who live in the city feel that they are part of the city and that they have the confidence that the city will go through the times with its identity, which change with the times and with the mixtures of other people coming. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ivone, for your words. Professor Jan Gianfei, you have the floor.
One question about the tourism's role in culture industries. You know, in China, the National Statistics Bureau has published a new categories of cultural industries. This document will guide the different statistic bureaus to gather fingers data from different perspectives. I think the tourism, the role in cultural industries. According to the new strategic guideline, so far I'm not sure the finger, but we have a database of cultural industries, so I can check the fingers and give to you later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jan, for your speech. It is impossible to summarize in 1 minute the things we have learned in this session. I believe we are a little bit more sage, to use a word that Professor Fan Zhou used a few minutes ago. But if I had to summarize it in one sentence, it would be that it is very obvious, very eloquent, that culture is both a driver and an enabler of development in cities. We all know that the United Nations is preparing a new development agenda, which is known as the Post-2015 Development Agenda. Cities and local governments are contributing to this debate, and we are advocating to have culture as an enabler of sustainable development and also as a driver of sustainable development. To have it as a driver of sustainable development, the main point of our advocacy is that there is a goal on culture and sustainable development, and we feel that we have to be strong and to feel the transformative power of culture for citizens when culture is the driver of change, when culture is the driver of sustainable development of our societies. We believe that a specific goal with clear targets and indicators of creativity, diversity, heritage, and knowledge is very much needed to condense this transformative power of culture in sustainable development. This morning, at the opening session of the Congress, the high-level representatives of the People's Republic of China also asked culture to be one of the development goals in the post-2015 development agenda. We believe that the final version of the agenda or declaration of Hangzhou needs to include a paragraph saying that we would like a specific goal on culture and sustainable development to be in the post-2015 development agenda. Thank you very much, Professor Fan Zhou. Thank you very much, Yvonne Bengoechea. Thank you very much, Professor Jan Fei. And thank you very much, all of you, for coming and asking questions and learning all together. And thank you very much also, and this is also with emphasis to the interpreters, because without them this session would not have been possible.